When making a documentary, I personally feel that it is good conduct to stay as professional as humanly possible. So that means that you are portraying what you're talking about without any sort of personal biases, and you're trying to just present the facts as they are. However, when you make a, say, weird, silly YouTube review thing for YouTube, then you can be as extreme, as exaggerated, and as unfair as you want.
So let's talk about Kirill the Wolf real quick. Kirill the Wolf is a former popular furry YouTuber who got outed for being a disgusting subhuman dogfucker who seemed to have a thing for fucking dead animals. He got outed when a Telegram group was leaked and a lot of text logs were tied to a bunch of different animal fuckers. One of these insane degenerates was this waste of space here called Snakefing, and from the very same chat logs that implicated Caro, it was revealed that Snakefing was talking very openly about wanting to fuck animals and young kids. As of such, he was later imprisoned due to being found guilty of the things said within those chat logs.
So why do I bring this up? Not like there's a connection between the crew behind Floraverse and the act of actually fucking animals.
Well, you see, when Caro finally returned to YouTube, he claimed that all the chat logs were doctored, edited to have made him seem worse than he actually was. He tried to cover for himself, saying that he didn't have a thing for fucking real life animals, it was just feral artwork. Kind of odd that you would admit to things so that even if the logs were real, you'd kinda have a backup defense, huh? Anyway, he made very sure to mention how Snakefing, the disgusting pervert that he is, was absolutely guilty of the things found in his chat logs. Funny, isn't it? Everyone in those chat logs were apparently guilty, except for little old Caro. No, his logs, those specifically, those were doctored.
Hey, very apropos nothing. In case you have been living under a rock or the Floraverse people have actually managed to take down the video series, I don't know, I wrote this script when the first video had come out. I made a video series called The House That Monsters Built, which is a documentary where I dive into the ongoings behind the comic Floraverse. Now, in case you just haven't watched that, or you have no interest in it, or it has been too long, here are the cliff notes. Everyone involved with this comic are subhuman trash.
Floraverse is touted as an open source webcomic and from the sound of things seems to primarily have sprouted from the brains of alleged dogfucker and pedophile Mal, defender of child porn possession and incest Evie, and the leader of the DK crew, the self-admitted dogfucker and alleged cult leader Glitched Puppet. This merry bunch have made a webcomic that used to be a story of Pokemon going on wacky adventures, but because everyone involved are obsessed with sex, a ton of porn was made as well. Thankfully, the crew were smart enough to make a separate website for all of these sexual indulgences called Forbidden Flora. But apparently, you will still have to read multiple things on Forbidden Flora to understand certain parts of Floraverse.
During my research for this comic, I actually tried to find out what exactly was Floraverse even about. And no matter how many people I saw talking about it, no one could actually give me a straight answer, not even an elevator pitch. So I'm actually kind of curious to see if the comic is actually as bad as the people who made it. So let's dive into the abyss and find out. Oh, and also, just because I'm a petty bitch, we're gonna put that there for the entirety of the video.
I don't think any of you will be shocked to find that I'm coming into this with a lot of bias. I mean, how can you not be biased after having to listen to this comic's creators talking about how they know what's best to people when actively hurting people?
I hate that people view these things that people will leave the server or whatever, or get kicked from the server because they really weren't willing to do what is healthiest for them or whatever.
But because I'm aware of this bias, I'm going to do something I don't normally do. Normally, I'd read a comic in the order it has been released, so if a prologue first came out later, I would first read that prologue later. This is just to give myself the experience as if I had been reading the comic from day one. I'm also gonna give a compliment right out of the gate. It seems like the creators know fully well how much of a mess their comic is, so they actually have a handy dandy guide for you to refer to wherever you may have problems figuring out how to read the comic. They also explain why it's a broken, confusing piece of shit with how they're trying to tell multiple different stories from multiple different timelines created by multiple different people, and honestly, I respect that.
But, even by design, a broken piece of shit story is still a broken piece of shit story.
The prologue explains to us how a race of creatures prospered to the point where they started to explore different planets in the hope to share their wealth of information and fortune with whatever they would find. However, unable to find any other life in the universe, they instead started killing themselves or exploring inwards, and it was through this inner self-exploration that they finally made contact with some deific being that ends up destroying them all. Now, in all honesty, this is pretty interesting in terms of starting a story with you essentially beginning with something that could be the end. I should leave a comment about this and compliment them. Huh? Please read our comment policy before commenting. Huh, okay, I guess I'll do that. This took me to a comic page of this cat thingy called Neon reading the internet and then finding something with low quality post alerts on it. That surely can't be by design, right? Well, a cursory glance in the comment section, you can see other people being confused as well, to which Evie has responded that link is supposed to actually lead here. She don't explain why or what you're supposed to take away from this page, and from the looks of it, I'm not the only one confused.
You know, in hindsight, I wasn't keen enough about this prologue to deal with this shit.
We move into the comic in earnest with Min here just looking at a plant that suddenly combusts before being called at by this creature here, Chris, because they are apparently missing the Equinox drop-off, whatever that is. So due to them missing the dragons, they can't get to the drop-off despite Min apparently being able to fly just fine, and because Min hates sailing, Min instead opts to go look for some seeds despite it seeming crucial for them to drop what seeds they already had off and within a timely manner. So Min flies off, but that doesn't matter cause Chris then finds Min and tells them that, hey, I found this permanent entrance, and we cut to the two at some ferry which they need to use to get to a place called Musapil. Why did we need to see Min flying off like that? What did that add? Anyway, the ferry place isn't much help cause it'll apparently take 3 days to get there, and they have to time it with all these other ferries, and also there are no ferries here in the first place, and there won't be one for a month or two, so Chris and Min are now stuck with no way to progress further. You know, except for the fact that Chris can for some reason turn into a rubber float.
If you could do all that, what the fuck was the point with all the drama up to this point?
Anyway, the two capsize because Chris fell asleep and they wash ashore on an island. Here Chris bumps into a local who tells them they have made it to the island Polaris. So, now comes one of those moments where I might be a little too critical, right? But I assumed the reason for needing the ferry was because Min seemed to be afraid of water. Well, that's immediately thrown away by them just riding Chris. Okay, then I assumed they needed the ferry because the ferry would be quicker than Chris. After all, Chris doesn't have any sails or engines or anything to propel them forward. But now we find out they are on fucking Polaris. It would have taken them 3 days to get to Musapil, and they somehow got to the island even further away in less than a day. Now, you might say we don't know it took less than a day, and that's 100% fair, but you know how you could easily solve this issue? By having a dumb fucking character that's writing in their stupid fucking journal mention just how long they've been at sea. But no, none of that. They're just there now, I guess.
We are not even halfway through chapter 2 and none of the actions these characters have taken has made any sense. I fucking hate it here.
So, skipping ahead a little, the two find their way to a city where they bump into Cayenne, who's some blacksmith or something, and they immediately assume that he's a pet. Why is that their first assumption? Everyone looks like weird animals, why did this guy be different? He's walking on his hind legs and shit too. I went and checked and there are in fact not a single instance of anyone having animal pets. Anyway, Cayenne wishes to help them find the entrance to Hell, cause apparently that's where the seeds are supposed to go. But first, he needs Min and Crest to go get a lava ore, so Cayenne can prove his worth as a blacksmith. Okay, so now we got the setup for a nice mission. This is gonna be interesting to and they just found the thing, no problem.
You know, I was actually kind of worried that I would have to say something nice about this story made by these indefensible subhuman beings. But I'm glad to tell you that that is clearly not the case.
Why even set the ore up as a thing that's hard to get when the characters are just gonna fucking go and do that off screen? I mean, sure, they show in a flashback that they went and got the ore, but how did they know where to get it? And for these two who can barely get from point A to B, how the fuck did they pull off a heist? Fuck. Anyway, shit happens and at this point it becomes very apparent that this is a story written by someone who didn't really have a plan. Stuff just happens. Constantly. Cayenne gets accused of stealing the ore, but then gets let go and his friend, this weird pot thing, Calliope, decides to leave their place of employment. Meanwhile, Min and Cress wants to get revenge for Cayenne taking the ore despite they already called off the deal earlier, and they don't know if Cayenne actually just took the ore and left. And while doing this, they bump into this lady who promises to take them to Hell, and off they go. This is very much a story written like, and then, and then, and then, and never, therefore, or as a result, or anything like that. The plot is just a straight line. Nothing seems to knock them off course. Not even them literally getting knocked off course.
One of the things that can make a plot interesting is if you imagine that you have a character that's walking down a road and then all of a sudden there's a wall in front of them. How do they get across this? Do they climb over the wall? Do they try and find a way around the wall? Do they blow the wall up? Any of these solutions will tell you something that defines the character. You know what doesn't tell you anything about the character and what is boring as shit? If the comic just has the characters walk through the wall as if it wasn't even fucking there in the first place.
So, I guess Cayenne and Calliope are also walking down towards Hell, and the kettle starts telling a bunch of stories about how the stars were made, and it's that typical angsty teenager storytelling where, oh, this girl got super moody, and so her tears became the stars in the sky, or whatever the fuck. This in no shape or form becomes important in the comic, and I think it was more focused on the kettle going on this long tangent about what's really important about stories is figuring out how stories came about, and figuring that out will shed light about the truths within. So, like, is this Glib telling us to dive into their story and figure out what truths there are within, or what the fuck? Anyway, the kettle then finishes off by saying, forgetting truths is the quickest path to self-destruction. Growth cannot be achieved without truth. And when you're not genuine, you risk losing yourself. If you're constantly handling dozens of untruths as if each were real, what is the true self left with?
Well, in that case, Glib must be on the highway to self-destruction, as they first claimed not knowing about Mal's ophilia, then it became Glib knowing about it because Mal made them fuck a dog, then Glib claimed that at least their dog was safe, then it came out that they did know about Mal fucking that dog, then Glib out of nowhere admitted to fucking 2 dogs, Then they admitted to one of their cats licking their vag, and then now it's suddenly sex with 2 dogs and orally stimulated by 2 cats. Are you seeing a trend here?
So this thing, Furfur, takes Min to her home in Hell, or as it's called here, Hellside, and she very, very clearly tries to get with Min. It's obviously toned down to hugs, or maybe it just gets interrupted before it could escalate, but boy, what a fun element to have in a story made by these people, huh? To have this clearly adult looking woman mech on this minor looking character. Anyway, they get attacked by this black ooze thingy before being rescued by some dudes who all have unique powers, who then takes the ooze down. We then skip past a bunch of character bios, and I guess this is the best time to talk about how the site is constructed. On some pages you will have multiple arrows you can click on. One will bring you to the next entry in terms of when it was uploaded, the other is for when it comes in terms of the plot. This is a noble concept and actually something I very much appreciate, because there is so much bullshit here. So it's nice that you can just trim that away if what you're here for is the story. But if there's anything covering Glib and company has taught me, it is that these people cannot shut the fuck up. Meaning that even amongst all this shit that they themselves cut out, there are small nuggets or sometimes entire story arcs needed to understand what is going on left on the cutting room floor. Like, I did not know until I read this weird side story with Cayenne and Calliope that the ooze earlier is being referred to as an angel, and it apparently wasn't just that. No, it was an entire invading force. So from here on, I started moving in terms of when things got released, which also means I came across Itchy Itchy here. This is a visual novel, complete with music, and just listen to this bop.
A song for the ages. Preferably an age where my hearing has gone.
Also, just gotta love this clarification down here. Woohoo! Something like 40 plus hours went into this update. 30 from me, 10 plus from others.
I didn't do fucking shit!
Like, you didn't even bother crediting them here? And is it so important for your frail little ego that we know you apparently did more work than the others? And this isn't the only time, there's also this page here. Why the fuck do you need to quantify how much people have done? If they have helped, they have helped, surely. Anyway, the problem with this is that you don't really get an idea what's canon and what isn't. Do I need to watch these visual novels, or are they just supplementary material? After all, reading them, it's suddenly about someone else, somewhere else, with no relation to the characters we know about, at least for a while. So you know what? Maybe I should just use the arrows that takes me through the story. But man, where was I? Guess I'll go find it in the archive, except fuck me, it's impossible to find the actual comic anywhere. What is all of this? Anyway, I somehow found the thing, and we return to some epilogue thing where it seems like someone has shut themselves inside somewhere and is missing music or sound in general, and listening to the visual novel earlier, I kind of envy them. It then just ends and doesn't seem to be related to anything, and the next in line is Itchy Itchy again. And you know what that means?
It's just such a banger! And by that I obviously mean I want to bang my head against the wall until my hearing ceases.
There is no way to turn the audio off, by the way. I tried. I had to turn off the volume from my speakers to be able to sit through this. It's also just such a bad fucking idea. Webcomics, or hell, comics in general, allow you to read a page and then stop, and then you can return to it later and read the next page. So does a visual novel if it's not done by idiots who don't know what the fuck they're doing, with the help of save states. Now obviously, I gotta be fair here, Itchy Itchy here isn't anywhere near as long as your typical visual novel, and thank fuck for that. But it is 10 times worse. So if you're like me, you will need to take a break every so often, and then when you get back to it, guess what? It's back to the beginning. And you know what that means?
The cherry on top is that as bad as the song is, it doesn't even loop properly. Like, listen to this.
Also, just before we move too far away from the comic's construction with the whole next by date and next by story arrows, I just need to stress that it just straight up doesn't work. There's a point where if you are a glutton for pain, you'll reach a chapter called Try Again, where you'll be introduced to characters as if you're supposed to know who they are. They'll refer to events and characters, and they won't stop doing that. Now, at first I thought this was the usual broken, terrible storytelling the comic has a plethora of, but when this just got so confusing, I literally had no idea what was going on. I had to look it up. Apparently, these characters were introduced in a visual novel called Bugs of Deep Mountain, released a full year earlier. And just to make sure I wasn't bugging, I fucking went back to the beginning of the comic and made sure I kept clicking on the next by story button, and not once did the story pop up.
Honestly, I was kind of tentative whether or not I actually had to read this, because these talentless writers believe that the pinnacle of creative storytelling is telling stuff out of sequence. So I guess I'll just have to be clueless about what the fuck is going on until maybe we get explained some of this shit. Cause that's good storytelling, right?
So back to Itchy Itchy. Itchy Itchy is about how a plague starts infecting parts of Hellside, and the super crew Cress found earlier now has to fix it with the help of this snake character. This seems like a prologue or something, but the problem is that your only point of reference are the aforementioned characters whom you barely know. The plot is in no shape or form immediately connected to the story about Min and Cress, and after reading Itchy Itchy, I don't even know if it's related to that story at all. I think maybe it's there to set up the world, but the problem is that it happens like mid-plot. Also, I just gotta say it, if you wanted a visual novel, you could have done better. I have played my share of free visual novels. I know it does not just have to be characters standing around talking.
I'll admit, it's mostly porn.
And when they are talking, you're even fucking up the text boxes, where instead of having them parted up to keep the text digestible, you just make it so whenever you go forward, you just read the next part of a massive text paragraph. It also has this scene here where a cat seems to try to get into this thing's underwear, which is an extremely unfortunate scene to include with everything we know about Glib. But yeah, you could have used unique images or something, and to be fair, they do that with future visual novels, but no. For now, that feature you have to go to their fucking YouTube videos, cause for some reason, Itchy Itchy could not be just a visual novel. No, it's also a YouTube video. And instead of having the same visual novel text box, we are now back to voice bubbles. There's also nothing here that warrants it being a video. There's nothing that has to be synced up or something. There's nothing that can only work if the pacing is in the creator's control. If anything, it almost goes too fast, so you have to pause the video multiple times to ensure you don't miss anything. And then the next YouTube video, it's too slow, so you're just sitting there waiting for it to catch up.
I'm honestly all for trying different new avenues to tell your story, especially when you're dealing with a webcomic that allows for that to happen. But I'm also of the opinion that the reason you're changing format kinda has to have some sort of meaning, especially when the majority of the comic until a certain point has been through one format.
It is, however, with Itchy Itchy that things start to happen that actually had me a little bit interested. Because for all the flaws of the story, and boy there are a lot, the way how the world just kinda breaks whenever angels appear is super cool and very well presented. Whether by design or not, things get super confusing. It feels like you're darting in and out of places and times. People seem to be speaking in gibberish, and the world as a whole is distorted. Hate the people who made this piece of shit all you want, and I do, but this one element is done really well. And when Itchy is over, we get our first real peek into the whole open source thing that Floraverse has touted itself with, and again, as much as it pains me to say this is done pretty well. After the ongoings of Itchy, there's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up, and you then have some of the characters in the chapter speak to the readers through a camera communication, giving multiple tasks that needs to be done, which is essentially giving the audience prompts on putting their own characters in the world and act out scenarios set up by the creators. I like how it's done in universe, and I like how it's not super plot essential stuff, but still related to the plot, so people can have their own adventures without it affecting the plot in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I don't recall it coming up this good ever again.
But the problem is, however, that ultimately the writing is pretty bad. It is very clear that very little, if anything at all, was planned from the get-go. Things just keep changing, and rarely for the better. At one point the currency is these things called bricks, other times it's dollars, a third is something called mubles. In the beginning it's very clearly low-tech, almost medieval, complete with swords, blacksmiths and shit. But then it's modern day society with smartphones, streaming services, manga and even fucking satellite imaging. At first it's very kid friendly and cute, but with time characters start cussing up a storm and there's blood and cults. At first people are communicating over great distances using these mirrors things like phones, but then later they're just replaced by smartphones. The seeds that are treated with such careless abandon that they are left behind because they don't meet a certain time limit are later revealed to be so important that the world literally hangs in the balance. It legit feels like the more time passes, the more it ceases to be a fantasy world and just becomes weird characters in our real world, but through a pink filter and some sparkles thrown here and there. There's a fucking character who says hallelujah, which is a fucking transliteration of Hebrew, which means praise ye Yah, referring to Jehovah. So is he now part of Floraverse? Perhaps this is another case of too many cooks in the kitchen with multiple writers wanting different things, and if the story truly is up for everyone to use the proverbial kitchen to cook whatever they want, then no wonder we get vastly different things. Also, nobody cooked. This is also exactly why this is such a bad idea when it comes to telling a cohesive story.
That, and it also causes the comic to have the biggest issue above everything else. It is a confusing pile of trash.
Now, at first everything is fine. Yes, there are plot holes, contrivances, and I frankly couldn't care less about the characters and what is happening. But that's the thing. I couldn't care less. It's inoffensive. But then at exactly the point where it goes into Itchy, the comic starts trying to punch over its weight class and it fails miserably. From this point forward, it just loses all focus. It's no longer about the seeds or about Min or Cress. I can't even tell you what it's about most of the time. When I heard prior to looking into Floraverse that people couldn't really tell what the comic was about more than it's about a bird and a blob wanting to transport some seeds to somewhere, I thought it was just because the comic would just start talking about a bunch of different stuff, but you'd at least still know who the characters were. Boy, how wrong I was. It's not that it meanders, it's that it just completely loses touch with reality. We go from Min and Cress and their seeds to be about a pandemic, to be about how one of the characters wants to go to an anime con, to a TV show about a haunted school, to be about how a character dies. Then there are like 3 whole chapters where I literally didn't understand a single fucking thing of what was going on, and it just got worse and worse and worse. Then, just as I thought we were never gonna see Min and Cress again, suddenly they're back a year later in our time, but we've skipped so far ahead in the plot now that whatever happened when we last saw them is now completely redundant, and Cress seems to have drastically changed character. And then you may be like me and go, oh, finally we're back to the status quo. But nope, suddenly all the weird bullshit starts happening again and you quickly lose the plot again. And we quickly jump from Chris and Min again to be about some other characters who I don't give a fuck about. And even those characters will act weird out of nowhere with no setup or anything. Like in Broken Toy Part 5, suddenly notes will come flying in and then all of a sudden this horse chick Amadusias will grow obsessed with a comic despite not showing any interest to it prior, and no one addresses these changes or impulses.
And throughout all of this, I had to sit through terrible YouTube videos and even worse graphic novels than there were actual comic pages. It is the closest I have ever been to scrapping a video mid-review.
And due to this confusing nature, and due to this jumping between formats, and due to, I'm just gonna come right out and spoil it, different timelines or frequencies if you would, it makes things so fucking confusing and impossible to follow. And I'm not the only one. The comment section for this comic is rarely to ever used for the longest time, but when it is, it was 9 times out of 10 from other readers asking about what the fuck is going on. It is that terrible.
Now, surely I wouldn't be petty enough to make a montage of screenshots of comments left by readers who are confusing as to what is going on.
And I am pretty sure this has been very, very heavily edited to not include anyone asking, hey, did you not fuck dogs? There's a point where this character Lily follows this character Neon, and Neon seems pretty hostile towards Lily. Then the next chapter happens and everything is now in this sketchy monochrome art style with a completely different tone. A character that wasn't there before is now somehow there and seems to be close to Neon, and Neon and Lily are now seemingly a couple or something? When the fuck did this happen? Is this a different timeline? Did we skip ahead? Did the weird next by plot arrows fuck up again? I thought for a moment it was filler due to the carefree feel of the comic compared to the chapter prior, but no, apparently it was totally canon as confirmed by Glib in the description of the comic, which they, by the way, never once used to clear up any confusion about what the fuck is going on to ensure the part of their audience who doesn't speak groomer are up to speed.
I know you're having trouble with keeping your story straight in real life, Glib, but at least try and keep it straight in your fucking story. Jesus Christ.
It might surprise you to hear this, but Floraverse is actually over. At least I'm led to think so. We haven't seen our protagonist or followed the plot now for what seems to be 5 to 6 years at this point. At around the time Mal got outed for being a zoophile and groomer, Floraverse just started losing the plot completely. And I mean that literally. The plot is just thrown to the side to become vent art instead. It is very blatant that suddenly newly introduced characters are the embodiment of the people trying to hold Mal, Glib and Evie accountable, who gets promptly dealt with or yelled at. From that it goes into self-pity, and the plot seems to mimic the same phase of lies Glib would write on their social medias, with first going on about how logs aren't enough to say something is fact, to calling stuff made up, to say they were abused as well and didn't know. This is also when it starts attacking specific members within the community with damn near infantile insults and imitations. Like there's this moment where 3 characters go someplace only to bump into this fat round character. Apparently the 3 characters are supposed to be Glib and 2 people they were dating at the time besides Evie, and Cass, who had allegedly wanted to be with Glib, and because they were apparently really annoying about it, they were presented as this round silly character.
And I only know this because I personally talked to some of the people who were within the community while these comics were made. How is the layman supposed to stand any chance in knowing what the fuck is going on? Also, quick side thing here, but Glib has actually featured several characters made by other people within these stories, yet has come out publicly in various co-host posts and said they do not consent to people using their characters in fan art in ways they do not agree with. Hey! The dog fucker wants to talk to us about consent!
These pages also, for whatever reason, try to be deep and emotional by suddenly starting rhyming, and I tried looking it up because it honestly just sounded like they were ripping off various emo song lyrics. And confusion I had before is now dialed up to 11 because now it is suddenly presented these vent posts as part of the plot, and it'll go in and out of plot stuff and allegories to Glib's relationship with Mal and I think also Penguin Sullivan with no clear separation. It's like a fever dream in the way it makes absolutely no sense. Someone in my community who was high as a fucking kite at the time tried to read it and they couldn't make sense of it either. And that's because, well, we don't know what it involves. We are just thrown in there mid-issue, not knowing who the people are, cause Clip doesn't have the fucking balls to call them out by name. They'll probably say that this is because they don't want people all up in their business, which they have multiple times before, but it's the same dumb cunt who is presenting their issues and personal drama in the form of a public comic mid-narrative.
Now, surely I wouldn't be even more petty to add another montage of all the times that Glib has used real life scenarios within the comic without giving any context to it, but I am going to add the context as provided by people within their community. No one would be that fucking petty.
Prologue 310 Act 5 refers to Kiwi Farms and other people holding Glib, Eevee and Mal accountable. Prologue 310 Act 4 Dead Air and Prologue 310 Act 3 is about Mal. The tarot cards refer to how Glib and Mal played tarot cards before they broke up. Fun tidbit, two of the people who worked on the soundtrack were actively being abused by Glib. Meet, Dr. Toxinuate, has Glib being Dr. Tox, and the two others were people Glib was dating at the time. There's this 700-page visual novel called Circlet of the Sun, which is about Bugsy, who Glib was just being openly abusive towards at the time, and this TV guy was close to that person and tried to defend them. The Adventures of Cutout and the Ruffians' free-in subjective subterfuge is, as we covered about Glib, two and their partners, and the jealous Cass, who by the way is the one who tried victim blame Bex when they tried to leave the server. Schoolyard Disease kills off the character Lily and Neon because Bugsy was a massive fan of them and Glib didn't like Bugsy. Who's left? What's right? It's just general venting where most of the community doesn't know what the fuck is going on either. The Masked Sun has a hotel room scene, which is again about the time Glib and Mal went on a trip together and even features specific lines that Mal allegedly said to Glib directly, such as, "I'm really attracted to you," and "so be someone else." There's also a part where they don't remember their own name in the story, which is actually shit Glib allegedly went through, but instead of talking to a therapist, they opted to make a comic about it. Angel Box Issue 2 is partially addressing Penguin Sullivan. Voting Time, I Love Being the Villain, is referring to someone who was in their server and was being abusive and predatory to a lot of people. The Free Bluffians and the Big Sad Wolf is about Bex as a result of Bex cutting them out of their life and even quotes them directly with stuff such as, "Don't worry about me anymore, I'm not your problem." The Educational Defense System is about Bex again, which refers to the time Cass tried to victim blame Bex for wanting to leave.
Listen, if making art like this helps you deal with whatever you're going through, I will never take that away from you. You cope however you want to cope with stuff. But adding it into a comic mid-plot in an already confusing story for an audience to consume without adding any context, you have got to be actually fucking unhinged in your head and a terrible fucking writer. How was anyone ever supposed to know what was going on unless they heard it straight from the horse's mouth?
The writing's biggest issue, if you ignore all the confusion, which to be fair is like 98% of the comic, is that nothing is ever concluded. No storylines or minor plot lines are ever finished. There's never a period at the end of the sentence. The comic effectively tells us nothing. It likes to bring up all these plot points and storylines, but ultimately instead of ending them, it just leaves them to focus on something else at the drop of a hat, and you never know whether or not you're gonna be returning to that story. The comic isn't telling me anything. There's no message being conveyed, and that is despite it doing its hardest to try and talk about serious topics. Like it will cover Glib's alleged abuse at one point, but then it just moves on. Like, okay, what do you want us, the audience, to take away from this? Are you better now? Did you overcome the struggle that came as a result? Are you determined to move forward? It is literally just the comic telling us, hey, I was abused, and then it just shuts up after that. It's like, people online were mean to me. Okay. The comic and its writers care so little about these plot details that at one point, Glib just makes a completely different comic so they can talk about the struggles they've been through, and as a result, Floraverse just gets ignored. For 2 entire fucking years.
And don't get me wrong, I damn near squeaked when I found out that I was 2 years closer to being done with this terrible comic. But it just goes to show that the plot ultimately doesn't matter. It's no longer what the comic is about, it's about vent art and weird Discord roleplays. If I was pettier than I already am, I could effectively give the writing of this comic a 1, cause it ultimately doesn't fucking matter.
All in all, I don't think I can remember having ever been forced to sit through a more confusing story ever. And the worst part is that when it actually is comprehensible and doesn't try to bite over more than it can chew, we are actually dealing with a rather competent story. The character interactions often flow naturally and the individual characteristics shine. There are also some creative and interesting ideas that just don't get handled with any sort of thought or care, and instead of becoming moments where you feel like you're dealing with a piece of medium that is smarter than you, it feels like the opposite, and it's like the Dunning-Kruger effect turned into a comic. It's dumb, it's overcomplicated, it's terribly told, and it is in no shape or form helped by the art and the god-awful presentation.
You would think that for all of the stories that Glib has made up and all of the long-ass apology letters they've written, that they would be a better writer than this, huh?
Also, a final little tidbit, and once you become aware of it, you will recognize it in everything Glib writes. Glib has this very unique way of writing stuff. For whatever reason, and I honestly think it's just them trying to be more dramatic whenever they can, they will repeat the beginning of their sentences. So it will be like, I wish you would have blah blah blah. I wish you would have blah blah blah. I wish you would have blah blah blah. And it just happens again and again and again. And it's such a tiny nitpick, but it is as consistent as the sun rising and setting. I swear, once you become aware of this, you will never not notice it, be it in the comic, in Glib's tweets, in messages on co-host, in messages on Discord, and hey, would you look at that, in Miles' apology letter.
How curious, huh?
It's an analog confusion, you are nothing more than a thought. Existential execution, just a fluke in evolution, history already forgot. You've been running from me like the dirt all second coming, and I'm here whether you like it or not. Initiated operation of your own extermination, now it's too late for you to stop.
it. That was part 1 of the Floraverse review. There is a lot to talk about this comic, so I've decided to split the video up into 2 parts. The people on Patreon can currently watch the entire thing, but if you're one of the people who need to take this in small pieces because there's so much dumb shit going on, then you can rest assured that the part 2 is gonna come out in 2 weeks. This is also the finale of this season, so just like between any other season, I am going to take a small break where I look at Webcomic Relief and see what I can change, what needs fixing, what needs updating, and all that stuff. So, please stay tuned, because I hope that what I bring next time is gonna be super sick. But, we'll have to see. We have also opened the Discord again, so now people can join that again, so please check it out if you are not already in the Discord. We closed it down because we didn't want any of the Floraverse fans to come in during the documentary series. But now we are finally opening the doors back up again, so please come and say hi. And with that, it's time to go into the amazing people who helped sponsoring this video. Amocin. If you have watched this show for long enough, you will have heard the name Amocin, who brought you the great adult webcomic Druids, taking place in the Warcraft universe. They have now finished that comic, discarded the Warcraft setting, and set sails towards a new comic called Skylords. Asholon Prime. Asholon hasn't gotten back to me about what they want me to push, so just know that they're freaking amazing. Send them some love if you can. Nicholas Knudson just keeps not wanting to send me stuff they want me to push, so they're just an honorary cool dude. Rojaru. Rojaru has finally taken the plunge into making comics, and you can now catch the 16-page prologue he made for the Sweet 16 comic contest on the newgrounds site, which he plans to continue as his full comic. Please show him some love and check out the comic. Sebastian Vanborg. Sebastian wants me to push the Twitter account Curious Zelda, which has a rich plethora of cute and funny cat images. He doesn't own the account or anything, but he just likes cats, so there you go. Afly. Afly hasn't gotten back to me either about what they want me to push, so you know the drill, they're just super awesome and deserve all the love. Hugo Junstrand. It's frigging time. My boy Hugo has finally announced his original series Torch Drop. It's a fantasy story where animals steal body parts from other species. It's still being produced, but you can check out the trailer in the description and see the amazing stuff Hugo has in store for you. DR. DR is the artist behind the cool sci-fi comic called Martial Star. If you want some good old sci-fi western action presented with some banging art, then this is the comic for you. Why Not Warrior? Why Not Warrior wants me to push the webcomic known as Hope. The comic is about superheroes that gets into trouble and who has to save the universe from an evil empire known only as Spade. When the young girl Raylan gets targeted by this evil empire, she joins forces with her friends to take them down and save the galaxy. And of course, let's not forget to mention all these lovely people. Asofs, Caesar Sealat, Drake of Adrian, KH Varfield, Nina Ha, Satya Sketchy, Shiv, The Bonsai, and Varatri. And also a super huge thank you to all the lovely people that you see here. If you want to support the show, please go to my Patreon. Here you can donate anything you want every month and you will get a ton of awesome rewards for it. Just go to www.patreon.com/riser with2eyes. If you want to watch me on Twitch, you can do so at twitch.tv/crownlessking, and that's with 2 eyes as well. Here you'll sometimes see dumb stuff like this happen.
She totally pained Leon's nails. You know what? I think like that's actually oh my god, what the fuck? That's not a fucking rat, that's a goddamn dog.
If you don't want to support the show financially, at least think about liking the video, subscribing to the channel, or sharing your favorite Webcomic Relief episode with your friends. I'll see you guys at the next Webcomic Relief. Take care.